The Sculpted Storm, Book 1, Shaped by Silence. Written by Tom Wouters. Prologue, Paintings. Eston, 2345 ATC. The darkness of the tower's base level became engulfed in a flare of light as Wavell kicked the wood off its old and rusted hinges. The door flew back and into the open room, causing a thunderous sound to echo upwards. With a warrior's grace, he stepped in, a bastard sword in one hand, as a light hammer rested in the other. His armor clunked as he moved into the dust-covered room. He had wrapped his orange cloth around the bottom of his helmet so that no dust would invade his breathing. The letter he had received bore instructions for this very place. He was warned of its current inhabitants, how they would pile up and be an overwhelming force if left enough time to do so. A figure shifted in the darkness, its elongated body stalking Wavell as if he were no more than prey. The creature did not have the mental capacity to see just how wrong it was in that assessment. It stepped into the light, vaguely humanoid in shape. It was grotesque enough to reveal the monster within. Bone-covered, inhumanly long legs and feet clicked against the floor with every movement. Small and distorted, the torso and head looked wrong in proportion. From what had once been a person, the ribcage now twisted outward into a shell of protection. Even the skull had pushed forward, covering an extended face frozen in perpetual astonishment or despair. Its arms almost reached the floor, bone-like claws scraping the old stone and kicking up some of the dust it had been standing in. It awkwardly stumbled towards Wavell, lashing out towards the armored man with one of its disfigured hands. Wavell casually sidestepped the initial attack, bringing his hammer up and swinging it against the creature's skull in the same fluid motion as the dull sound of cracking bone momentarily filled the room. The creature collapsed, screaming in pain, with what sounded like two voices mangled into one. A faint wisp of dark smoke emanating from the wound on its face. Wavell brought his sword down, stabbing the creature through its broken skull, silencing it with a mercifully swift death. Two more shapes moved down the stairs, tripping over one another before crashing at its base. Wavell judged them to be further in the process of morbexation as these moved faster. The taller of the two creatures shot forward with surprising speed, knocking Wavell back with its elongated bone-covered arm. As Wavell stumbled, two arrows flew past him, one piercing the creature's torso, while the other ricocheted off its skull. It let out a howl of pain, with that same duality in its voice. Tobias stepped into the corner, both of his modified handheld crossbows drawn as he reloaded them. He had placed handles on top of the string of the crossbows, making them easily reloadable while never needing to let go. He brought the weapons down to his belt, where several bolts hung, tips facing down. He glided the shaft of his crossbow up, knocking one of the bolts. He shot again. One of the bolts hit the creature in its neck, forcing it to stagger back. The second shot fired as the creature reeled back, shoving the initial arrow deeper in its throat. Blood sprayed out in waves that splattered the dusty floor. Wavell regained his footing, closing the distance and slamming the head of his hammer into the puncture wound. The tip of a bolt popped out the other side of the abomination's neck from the sheer force of the impact. Not so merciful this time. Wavell realized the remaining creature wasn't getting up. It couldn't. Outside the tower, Vin was holding it in place. She had sensed the creatures inside before Wavell even opened the door. Having horns sprouting from where eye sockets should be did little to hinder her physical perception of the world. Quite the opposite. Having a Charnin in the crew was certainly invaluable in these situations. She had forced the creature to the ground, her hand seemingly gripping the back of its neck from afar as she slowly closed it, balling her fist. The sickening sound of snapping bone and tendon and tearing flesh and muscle echoed through the space as the creature's spine and body crumpled and folded into itself under the force of Vin's touch. She dropped her focus after that, sensing no more threats on this level of the tower. Them Morbex weren't as strong as you claimed they were, Wavell. Tobias scoffed as he latched his two crossbows back onto his belt and adjusted his wide black hat. Tobias was human, pale of skin with dark brown hair that seemed to have a will of its own. His beard covered his face in awkward patches. He wore a long dark coat with what Wavell considered to be expensive clothing underneath. These weren't Morbex, Tobias, Wavell grunted. Just Morblings. There's a difference, Tobias mocked. Quite a few. Vin interjected as she walked in, minding her head as she did. She stood over 2.5 meters tall, her light brown hair flowing down into a braid at its end. Her smooth skin was light brown and unexpectedly thick, as was typical for the Charnin. Morblings are failed Morbex, in a way, Vin continued. Be glad we didn't have to fight an actual Morbex, Tobias. I doubt your arrows would have done any good in that confrontation. Oh, I assure you, Vin, these two ladies aid me wherever I go, and in whatever way I need, Tobias said casually, proudly showing off his crossbows, a sly smirk plastered on his face. So, did that letter of yours also say what exactly we're here for? I know the Grand Tower of Eston isn't exactly a place of luxury, but is there anything of value here? Yes, Wavell said, taking off his helmet. His light blue skin and his thick black hair, oily and caked in parts with dirt and dust from several days on the road, seemed paler than usual in the dim light of the room. Typically, Zalian people wore colors of blue and aquamarine. Wavell, however, had chosen orange to drape around his armor. The letter spoke of the summit. 3 objects we need to bring back. Payment follows when we return to Viona, Wavell said in his usual stoic demeanor. Right, Tobias nodded. And you trust this, Katie? Seems like we're betting a whole lot on some empty words. If he doesn't pay, we'll simply not give him the goods. Pawn it off on someone else in Viona. All right, Tobias nodded. Now, unless you have any more pressing questions, I suggest we start climbing. We have a long way to go, Wavell said, putting his helmet back on. As he started ascending the first set of stairs, the dark and windowless tower engulfed everything. It took his bright blue eyes some time, however, to adjust to the dark so oppressive it seemed surreal. These alien were a kind of attuned that were luckily used to low visibility, for they lived in the northwestern part of Aelia, in the region known as the Baradi Mountains, a snowy range frequently blasted with blizzards, snowstorms. Tobias would certainly have a harder time climbing the winding staircase than the rest of their group. While humans were well equipped and versatile, they often lagged behind the more specialized species. Finn barely noticed that it was dark in the first place. The first few flights of stairs crumbled slightly beneath their weight, dust and debris shifting around with every step. Wavell took the lead, his boots firm against the crumbling stone, while Tobias followed close behind, muttering about the lack of proper torchlight. Vin brought up the rear, her unseeing gaze fixed on something beyond the veil of darkness. A gust of cold air slithered down from above, carrying the scent of damp rot. The higher they ascended, the more oppressive the air became. Wavell flexed his grip around his weapons, his senses on high alert. Something wasn't right. This place shouldn't be this cold, Tobias mumbled, rubbing his hands together. Feels like we're walking straight into a tomb. Vin let out a slow breath. Perhaps we are. It didn't take long before they reached a landing where the stairwell opened into a vast chamber. Wavell's boot dislodged a brittle shard of bone, sending it clattering against the floor. The walls, marred with deep, claw-like gouges, the remnants of something far older than the morblings they had encountered earlier. This wasn't done recently, Wavell observed, running his fingers over one of the gashes. These cuts are decades old. Tobias flicked his crossbow's trigger mechanism absent-mindedly. Well, whatever left those marks, let's hope it's long dead. Vin did not respond. Instead, she approached one of the murals that remained partially intact. She ran her fingers across the stone, brushing away layers of dust and grime to reveal a depiction of three figures standing before an enormous sun, their hands raised in reverence. Further down the mural, however, the walls became as dark as Wavell had ever seen. Light itself seemingly scared of the depiction on the wall. That's not just any sun, Vin murmured. That's the Sovnar's mark. Wavell frowned, snapping himself away from the dark. The Sovnar haven't been seen in ages. If this temple was tied to them... He turned his gaze upward, toward the unseen summits of the tower. What exactly were they guarding? Vin gazed towards the dark too. that place just out of sight. Tobias seemed to ignore it completely. It was as if all three of them had noticed the gaping hole in the room, that dark calling out to them, but none dared to speak to it. "Ethelon," Vin whispered. A sound echoed from above, a slow scrape, like nails against stone. Tobias cursed, loading his crossbows with a practiced motion. "Tell me that was just the wind." "No," Wavell said, raising his sword. "That was something moving." The temperature plunged, as if the tower itself exhaled an icy breath. The darkness above shifted, thick and suffocating, as a form detached itself from the void. Twin, hollow eyes burned through the blackness, two pale orbs gleaming like sickly lanterns. Vin stepped back. "That," she whispered, "is not a morbling." A guttural rasp raked against the walls, a sound like flesh peeling from bone. That was the only warning it gave. One heartbeat. It was as still as the stones it had been attached to. The next, its grotesque body was ripping through the space between them, shooting straight towards Vin. Much like the morblings before, its skeleton had twisted outward, creating a jagged exoskeleton of interwoven ribs and exposed vertebrae. But this one was bigger, its limbs corded with unnatural muscle, its fanged maw dripping with a viscous, inky ichor that hissed as it met the cold air. Shadows coiled from its mouth like living smoke. It wasn't hunting them, it was consuming the space between them. Vin barely had time to react. The creature was nearly on her, clawed arms outstretched, reaching. A blur of metal crashed into its side. Wavell slammed into the beast with the force of a battering ram, his hammer striking bone with a deafening crack. The impact sent both of them flying. Wavell collided against the stone wall with a grunt, while the creature tumbled across the floor, gouging deep trenches into the dust-covered stone. The entire tower groaned from the force of the impact. Tobias was already in motion. He raised both crossbows and let loose a flurry of bolts. The first embedded itself deep into the thing's ribcage, and the other glanced off its skull with a sharp ping, barely having any effect on the creature. It whipped around, the twin purple embers of its eyes narrowing, and then it charged again. It barreled forward, low and fast, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris. Giving Wavell barely a heartbeat to brace, the creature slammed into him, the sheer impact rattling his ribs, knocking the breath out of him. His boots scraped against the floor as he was pushed back, his armor groaning. It was strong, far stronger than anything they had faced before. Vin thrust her hands forward, her breath shuddering. The surrounding air shimmered, an invisible force gathering in her outstretched palms. Then she released it. A pulse of raw energy shot outward, slamming into the creature like a hammer of her own. The thing reeled, its legs skidding across the stone floor as it was shoved backward. The pressure forced a ragged, two-toned wail from its throat. Wavell, sucking in a sharp breath, used the opportunity. He swung his hammer in a powerful arc, aiming for the creature's knee. Tobias followed suit, following another well-placed bolt into its shoulder. The beast faltered, but it did not fall. It twisted unnaturally, its elongated arms lashing out. Clawed fingers raked across Wavell's breastplate, screeching through the metal like nails on glass. He grunted as the force sent him staggering, blue blood dripping from beneath his armor. Where it touched the ground, the blood froze immediately. "Then, the war," he bellowed. She didn't hesitate. Vin threw her focus into a single concentrated strike. The air ignited around her hands. She twisted her palms, the force gathering, churning, then detonating forward in a deafening blast. The tower wall exploded. Stone and mortar erupted outward, bursting into the open sky. Light flooded the chamber, momentarily blinding Wavell and Tobias. The creature shrieked, its senses overwhelmed. It staggered, its movements sluggish and uncertain. Wavell surged forward, barreling into the beast with a shoulder charge, driving it toward the gaping hole in the wall. The two locked in a brutal grapple, steel against bone, brute force against monstrous strength. Then, the ground vanished beneath them. Wavell felt himself becoming weightless. His stomach lurched as he plunged into the open sky, the endless expanse of cloud stretching beneath him. The creature screeched as it twisted in the air, flailing against gravity's pull. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Then, a powerful force yanked Wavell backwards. His body jerked as he was pulled back toward the tower, Vin's invisible grasp dragging him away from the abyss. He barely had time to register the movement before his boots slammed against solid stone. The creature was not so lucky. It tumbled downward, its screams vanishing into the swirling sea of clouds. Wavell exhaled sharply, catching his breath. His pulse thundered in his ears. Vin collapsed to one knee, her hand pressed against her forehead. Wavell stood up and approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. His voice, though rough, was steady. "We're nearly there, Vin." Behind his helmet, he smiled. "Take it easy now." Wavell steadied himself, his boots firm against the chipped stone. The wind howled through the gaping hole Vin had blasted in the tower wall, whipping dust and loose debris into a swirling vortex. "By the flame," Tobias exhaled, glancing at the empty sky beyond the ruined wall. "That could have been us." Vin didn't respond. She was breathing hard, her shoulders rising and falling in rapid succession. She pressed the heel of her palm against her temple, her body trembling with exertion. Wavell crouched beside her, his voice softer now. "You overexerted." "I had to." Vin's voice was barely above a whisper. Her attention lingered where the creature had fallen, lost in the sea of clouds. Wavell felt the pressure changing. that dark, it was still there. Even though the room had been bathed in light, that dark lingered like a cancer growing on the tower's wall. None spoke of it. All noticed. Wavell stepped onto the first stair, sword raised, his boots pressing into the worn stone. The surrounding air seemed to press inward, making each breath feel heavier, more labored. Tobias followed, checking his bolts. Vin, though visibly drained, summoned the last of her strength and climbed with them. The ascent stretched on longer than it should have. Each floor was darker than the last, the walls narrowing, the very architecture twisting in a way that defied logic. Shadows clung to the stone like living things, recoiling from their presence, yet never fully retreating. Finally, the staircase ended. The summit of the tower was vast, a cavernous space carved from smooth stone. A domed ceiling loomed overhead, its surface cracked with time, but still bearing the faintest traces of ancient murals. 3 massive stone frames stood embedded within the far wall, their surfaces coated in dust, their edges worn but unbroken. 3 paintings. Wavell crept forward, his breath steady, but his grip on his sword tightening. Tobias lingered near the entrance, scanning the chamber, crossbows raised. Vin was the last to step inside, her expression unreadable as her senses focused on the paintings. Wavell studied the paintings in silence. He had no words for what he felt, only an unshakable certainty that whatever they had come here for, whatever had brought them to this cursed place, it was tied to these images. Tobias cleared his throat. All right, we're at the summit. What did KT want again? 3 things, Wavell rasped. Didn't say exactly what. Well, Vin murmured, 3 paintings? We can't heave those paintings out of here, Vin, Tobias pointed out. Or are you planning to simply throw them down? It's not the paintings, Wavell said. It's these 3. He pointed at 3 items lodged into place below the paintings. To the left, the painting of a golden-haired boy stood. None recognized his heritage or race. He was perhaps 12 years old, but held a sword like he was a veteran. He stood in a ring of some sort, sand all around him. As the heat of the twin suns undoubtedly beat down on him. Below his portrait was an amulet of gold, as well as the portrait's name, the Fleeting Flame. To the left, the painting depicted a dark-skinned girl with silver hair, her delicate fingers clutching a silver lyre as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. She stood amidst a raging red storm, ash and sand swirling violently around her, half consuming her figure. Her eyes, one a piercing red, the other a muted gray, glistened with unshed tears. She gazed into the distance, lost in something unseen. Beneath the painting, embedded in hardened tree sap, rested a fragile seedling, frozen in time. The name of the painting being The Broken Ballad. "The Red Scourge," Vin murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She exhaled slowly, as though the weight of the past pressed down on her shoulders. "She's trapped in it," Tobias scoffed, stepping forward. "By the flame, how old are these?" He gestured toward the Dakin girl with an incredulous shake of his head. "The scourge disappeared ages ago, decades at least." "Centuries, more like," Wavell corrected, his voice rough. His gaze had already drifted to the middle painting. This one depicted a boy, half Loftian, his mixed heritage evident in his pale gray complexion and jet black hair. He stood alone in the depths of a forest, gripping a simple wooden stick. His eyes were distant, unfocused, as if searching for something just beyond reach. Behind him, rows upon rows of statues stretched into the shadows, each frozen in eerie silence. Beneath his portrait, embedded into the base of the painting, was a chisel, its handle worn smooth from use, its blade glinting faintly in the dim light. A sculptor's tool, the very instrument needed to carve statues like those looming behind the boy. This painting was called the Sculpted Storm. Wavell swallowed hard. He saw himself in that boy. Half-Loftians were rare, and those who existed did not usually remain so for long. When human blood mixed with that of the attuned, the child carried both traits, but only for a time. By adolescence, the attuned gene would fully awaken, consuming any trace of their human lineage. Wavell knew this truth intimately. His father had been human, his mother's alien, and now, here was another like him, captured in paint, lost in time. "Amazing," he whispered. Vin's voice cut through the silence. "What does it say?" Wavell blinked. "What?" "The chisel." She gestured toward the tool. "There's an inscription on it." Tobias leaned closer, frowning. "Didn't notice that before." Wavell reached out, his gloved fingers grazing the cold metal as he intended to lift the chisel to inspect the markings. The moment he made contact, his breath caught, his eyes rolled back. A deafening shockwave blasted through the tower, reverberating through the stone walls like the howl that sent Tobias and Vin stumbling back. The very air trembled. Dust and loose debris cascaded from the ceiling. Cracks spider-webbing from Wavell's now petrified body. "Wavell!" Vin shouted, reaching toward him. An invisible force shoved her backward, slamming her into the base of the Dakin girl's portrait. Tobias, still reeling, barely had time to register the violent shift in the room. His gaze flicked toward the third painting, the golden-haired boy. The details were almost lifelike, his golden locks catching what little light remained in the chamber. Tobias felt drawn to the golden amulet. A whisper coiled around the edges of his mind, a silent urging. Take it. Take the girl's thing and go, Tobias yelled to Vin as he reached out to the boy's amulet. His fingers curled around the amulet's cool surface. Then everything collapsed. A second shock wave burst outward, this one greater than the first. The entire summit of the tower quaked. Stones cracked. Walls split. The ground lurched beneath them, as if the very foundation had been ripped away. The tower was falling. Tobias, let go of it, Vin screamed, forcing herself to her feet as the world tilted. But Tobias's expression twisted into something unreadable. His mouth hung open in shock, his fingers tightening around the amulet as if it had fused to his skin. Gravity failed. Vin screamed as she was flung to the ceiling. Wavell and Tobias both clung to the floor as if nothing had happened, their stone-like appearances now one with the tower. Vin, however, felt every movement the summit made. Stone and dust spiraled around her as the tower fell. Chunks of ancient rock tumbled past and around the room as they gained speed. Pain exploded through her limbs as she struck solid stone. Her breath knocked from her lungs. The ringing in her ears was deafening. Dust scattered everywhere, overwhelming her senses. She simply felt the movement. The movement of the tower summit breaking off and falling down towards the sea of clouds below.